Sophie Industries presents the Dark Depths Podcast. Episode 1, Serpenthead Lake. Hello, divers! Welcome, one and all, to the first chapter of the new and improved Dark Depths of Isarine. Some of you may know me, though most of you probably don't. My name is Pahli of Oren, and I'm a small-town gal fascinated by the harrowing tales of Isarine. From terrible monsters, to chilling disappearances, to unexplainable mysteries. If it's spooky, then I'm obsessed. For most of my life, it was just an idle interest, but then one of my friends encouraged me to write about it, so a few years ago, I started a small publication called The Dark Depths. The thing blew up so fast that I got a free ride to Alexandria prison. All jokes aside, The Dark Depths became quite a big deal, and I've started to get frequent letters from people all over Isarine asking for new chapters. So I've worked with my new business partner, Chelta of Daruna, and the Hunters Guild to make sure that the Dark Depths is available all across Isarine. You can now enjoy the Dark Depths no matter where you are. Alexandria, Finney, the Wilds, Dragon Coast, or even Kansas. One reader insisted they're from there, but honestly, I've never seen it on a map, so I'm not sure if they were just messing with me. Still, the raw logistical headache of distributing the Dark Depths like this is quite a lot for me and Chelta. So, if you like it, please tell a friend and leave a review. It'll help us keep the momentum going and continue to create these stories. And with all of that out of the way, let's dive right into our first story. Now, divers, at this point, I feel like I've basically heard it all. I've gotten hundreds of letters about spooky shadows and weird neighbors and creepy books, and one of my personal favorites, a dog that I think is a transcendent because he never barks, he just stares at people all weird. A lot of times, new Dark Depths episodes get delayed literally because I have to sift through piles of these sorry not sorry, ridiculous letters. Today's story, I assure you, is not one of those letters. No, divers, today we got something juicy. A story that, when I read it, made my skin crawl. This all began a few weeks ago when I received a mysterious package containing a notebook, a Hunters Guild report, and a letter. Let's begin with the letter, shall we? Dear Polly, my name is Kleesin of Jhante, hailing from Dragon Coast. I'm a long-time reader, but a first-time writer. I was actually planning to write you before all this happened, to ask for your help. In hindsight, I should have, but perhaps impatience got the best of me, or perhaps it was shame. I know not the reason, only the lingering regret. Perhaps if I had written to you, this could have all been avoided. You see, about 2 or 3 months ago, my friend Ushu suddenly became enamored with the Legend of Serpenthead and the treasure buried within. He would talk about it incessantly, obsessed with the idea of the Omnelixir. At first, I thought it to be a passing fixation, like when he spent 3 whole days reading everything he could about Matna, but when days turned to weeks, I began to grow uneasy. He started writing to scholars across Zell and Alexandria, anxiously awaiting their replies. And when the replies never came, he began to get lost in his own research. He would tell me about his grand ideas, theory crafting clever ways to safely explore the uncharted depths of Serpenthead Lake. I entertained the thoughts, even encouraging some of them early on, but eventually I grew tired of his obsession and asked him to stop. He would still bring it up every now and again, but I would never engage with him about it, and eventually he stopped talking about Serpenthead altogether. I wonder now if I had continued to talk to him about it, to take the time to talk him out of it, patiently like I should have, if things would have been different. But there's little worth entertaining such fantasies now. One day, he vanished without saying a word. I went to the tavern to find him on a day like any other, but he never showed up. The next day, I went to his home to check in on him, but when I knocked on his door, there was no answer. No noise from within. At first, I thought little of it. Ushu was never one to stay still for long, and I wondered if perhaps he had taken a sightseeing trip to Finney to visit his grandmother. But as days passed, I began to grow increasingly worried. I asked around our home of Jhante to see if anyone knew where he'd gone, but the most I got was from a neighbor who said she'd seen him in town, buying things from a traveling merchant. I tried to track the merchant down, but they had long since left. Desperate, I ended up enlisting the help of the Hunters Guild. At first, the guild was reluctant to get involved, but I kept coming back day after day until they finally acquiesced. They sent a hunter who managed to unlock the door. The inside of Ushu's home was shocking, to say the least. The first thing that I noticed was the smell. I couldn't tell you what the smell actually was, but something, somewhere in my brain, immediately recognized it. It was the kind of deep nostalgia you get from hearing a song your mother used to sing when you were little. A song you don't know the words to, even though the lyrics are etched into your very bones. I could feel my body inexplicably drawn toward it. The sensation was equal parts calming and horrifying. The hunter and I exchanged an uneasy glance, and I wondered if they had experienced the same nightmarish yearning. I suppose I will never know. Without saying a single word, they cautiously entered the home, and I followed right behind them. The inside of his home had been covered in strange metallic film, blocking light from the windows. In the middle of the room were strange implements that appeared to be smithing tools. Rancid, viscous, clear liquid sat pooled on the ground, the surface of it shimmering as air blew in from the open door. Most notable, however, were two metal racks that sat at the edge of the kitchen. One of the racks was empty, but the other hung a strange suit made of a leathery fabric, adorned with metal plates, almost like some kind of armor. Alongside it was a bulbous metal helmet with a circular glass window on the front and multiple protrusions along the sides and top. For a moment, I thought I saw a pair of eyes gazing at me from the other side of the helmet, but as I did a double take, I realized it was simply a strange reflection from the light flooding in from the doorway. I couldn't make heads or tails of the thing, but seeing it gave me chills. It felt alien, entropic, perhaps. The two of us scoured the rest of his home, but aside from the tools and suit, we were unable to find any clues about Ushu or his whereabouts. Eventually, we ran out of things to search or investigate, and the hunter locked the house back up. I reluctantly allowed the hunter to take the suit, tools, and a sample of the liquid back to the Hunters Guild to study, and I returned back to my own house, no closer to finding out what happened to Ushu. I spent the next several days anxiously waiting to hear back. For the most part, it was because I was worried about Ushu, but I have to admit that it was selfish as well. The thing is, every time I found myself alone, I kept thinking about that accursed helmet. The alien design of it haunted my dreams. I saw it, submerged deep within the abyssal depths of hell, cracks across the surface like forks of lightning, and horrible, haunted eyes staring from the other side. They were the eyes of someone, or something, that had been driven to madness beyond comprehension. A being that had dispelled the great illusion of fear by becoming fear itself. I couldn't rid the image from my mind. And so I kept myself desperately busy. I spent my days working fervently in the markets, and my nights drinking the flow of time until the tavern closed. I spent as little time alone, with my eyes closed, as I could. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. I felt haunted. I felt infected. A few days later, when the Hunters Guild finally got back to me, I already knew what Ushu had created. A diving suit. A device to survive depths that humans were not meant to survive. A tool to see a world that humans were not meant to see. I knew what I had to do next. And so I set off to Serpenthead Lake. I never wished to be a part of the Dark Depths, but the story must be heard. These mistakes must never be repeated. I have included with this letter the official report from the Hunters Guild, as well as my notebook, journaling my experiences from the day I received the report until now. I am so relieved to send this all off, away from me. I hope to never think on it again. Your loyal diver, Kleesin of Jhante. Unnerving. Now, my own personal knowledge of Dragon Coast is pretty limited, so before I got started reading through this journal, I wanted to give myself the proper context for understanding what the Legend of Serpenthead is, and frankly, why we should even care. To get some insight into this, I reached out to my good friend Ariana of Elfrey. Here's what she had to say about Serpenthead. Hey, Pahli. You're in luck, because I just recently came across the Legend of Serpenthead and have some first-hand reports from Draconian scholars in Zell. It turns out that the Legend of Serpenthead actually predates the founding of Dragon Coast as a nation. As you can probably guess, before then, it was just a coastline that had, well, a lot of dragons. The legend itself is fascinating and actually involves King Alexana, which is how I discovered the story to begin with. Sometime before calendar year 50, King Alexana arrived at the location we now know as Dragon Coast in search for a giant mythical snake called Sola Seizana Jivan, a creature that had existed since the dawn of time and had a close relationship with the divine. Its blood was said to be the ultimate elixir of life and could cure any ailments or heal any wound. According to records from King Alexana and one of his closest advisors, he was on a journey to find this elixir in order to cure a condition that vaguely translates into astral poisoning, colloquially known at the time as starfall, a condition that befell his pregnant wife. We don't have much more information about the condition other than symptoms that vaguely resemble an autoimmune disorder. Anyway, King Alexana, in addition to a caravan of his most trusted knights, scoured the length of Dragon Coast in search of Sola Seizana Zivan in order to cure his wife's starfall, but there were no signs of the creature. Draconian natives were of little aid in his search, though in his journals, he states uncertainty whether it's because they had never heard of the creature or if they simply had misgivings about dealing with foreigners. In any case, by miracle or fate, King Alexana and his knights ended up at the Serpenthead Peninsula. It was the afternoon of a midsummer day, with the tide receding, when the Alexarian caravan set up a camp close to the sea. King Alexana cast his eyes upon the distant shores of Entropy, and in a moment of solitude and desperation, he knelt in front of the waters and offered a prayer. His prayer was addressed not to Pearl, nor any specific divine, but to the planet itself, to the very heart of Isarine. Remarkably, his prayer was heard. From the depths of the ocean came a deep rumble, and a tremendous white serpent rose from the seas, water cascading off its pearlescent scales as it blotted out the sun. Alarmed by the sudden appearance of such a terrifying beast, the knights of Alexana engaged the creature, and a devastating battle ensued. The two sides fought, tooth and nail, throughout the entire night, as blows were exchanged back and forth. At long last, as the sun rose, only King Alexana stood. Desperate, he drew upon the last remnants of his power and summoned forth a massive spear of essence that impaled the great serpent, skewering it into the land. The legend says that the spear was so powerful it drove deep within the earth, hollowing out the cavity now known as Serpenthead Lake. With the great serpent paralyzed, King Alexana was finally able to approach the creature, and with great care removed a vial of the creature's blood. Once he had obtained his prize, he released the legendary Sola Seizana Zivan, and it slithered back into the sea. The rest, as they say, is history. King Alexana returned to his nation a hero, and with the vial of Omnelixir was able to cure his wife of starfall. A few weeks later, she gave birth to a beautiful, healthy baby girl, the first princess of Alexana. These days, the legend of the Serpenthead posits that when Sola Cezana Zevan was impaled by King Alexana, its blood pooled into Serpenthead Lake, sinking to the bottom of the cavity. This would be unusual given that the density of blood and water are so similar, but since we're dealing with magical blood, so to speak, it's hard to disprove outright. Additionally, nobody really knows how deep Serpenthead Lake is, only that it's far too deep for humans to traverse. So, as it stands, it's impossible to verify or debunk the legend. Fun fact, the only major contradiction between Alexarian and Draconian accounts of the tale is that in the Draconian accounts, King Alexana voluntarily sacrificed his men for the Omnelixir. Understandably, this account does not paint King Alexana in a very favorable light and is henceforth missing from all Alexarian historical records. Aside from that, everything else seems to line up one for one. I hope that answers your question about the Legend of Serpenthead. Please let me know if you need anything else. Sincerely yours, Ariana of Elfrey. Thank you, Ariana. So now that we're all on the same page about the Legend of Serpenthead and its history, there's only one more thing to look at before we dive into the heart of the story. And that is, of course, the Hunters Guild report. Commission report from the Draconian Hunters Guild, calendar year 258. Requested by Kleesin of Jhante. Assigned to Pahli Solavat, Hunter Grade 8. Kleesin requested investigation of a friend's residence in Jhante under suspicion of a missing persons case. Pahli voluntarily took the commission. After arriving in Jhante, Pahli was able to enter the premises of Ushu and found no evidence of foul play. Multiple artifacts and substances were obtained from the scene, including an unknown liquid and what appeared to be armor. The armor was later identified by Zell scholars as a technology from Entropy for deep water diving. The liquid was not identified, but appears similar in composition to amniotic fluid. For the safety of Jhante residents, Ushu's home was quarantined until all unknown materials could be safely disposed of. Ushu's whereabouts were not determined. After ensuring it to be safe and free from contamination, the diving technology was returned to Kleesin for safekeeping. The commission was closed by Kleesin, and the commission fee was waived by Pahli. Unknown liquid similar in composition to amniotic fluid? I get chills just thinking about it. Now, that was a lot of information we just went over, so let's just recap all the important bits to make sure everybody's on board. I got a package from Kleesin of Jhante. Inside it was a letter about his missing friend, Ushu. Ushu had allegedly become obsessed with the Legend of Serpenthead, which is a story about an ancient snake whose blood can cure any ailment. Supposedly, its magical blood, known as the Omnelixir, has pooled at the bottom of Serpenthead Lake. One day, Ushu vanishes, and a few days later, Kleesin gets worried enough that he commissions the Hunters Guild. The Hunters Guild sends Pahli Solavat, who manages to break into Ushu's house, and the two find diving technology there, in addition to an unknown liquid and metal film. After the Hunters Guild cleans everything up, they return the diving suit to Kleesin, where we now find ourselves. Got it? Good. Now make sure you're comfortable, because things are about to get wild. Imagine for a moment that you're in Kleesin's shoes. Your friend's gone missing, and you've basically got no leads on where he is, other than the fact that he was obsessed with this legend about magical blood at the bottom of a bottomless lake. I think we can agree that basically any normal person would sit at home, twiddle their thumbs, and wait for their friend to come back, right? I mean, that's the reasonable thing to do. But we also know that if you do that, you don't have a story. And clearly, we have a story. Now, this might not have translated well over his letter, but Kleesin is emotional at this point. He's desperate. He's been worrying about Ushu every waking minute of his life, and it's gotten so bad that he can't sleep. When he lays down, he's either haunted by the image of this strange helmet, or he's haunted by the disappearance of his missing friend. In any case, his mind becomes his worst enemy, and eventually, he gives up on sleeping altogether. I think we all know where this is going, so I'll spare you the details of his deliberation, his nights spent sobbing, and the strange fever dreams that eventually led him to disembark. What's important is that he decides that he must follow Ushu's footsteps. He's convinced that this diving suit was deliberately left behind by Ushu for him. He spends paragraphs mulling over whether Ushu is waiting for Kleesin to join him, or if Ushu has left the diving suit as some kind of test or trap, but many of the thoughts are incoherent at best and hysterical and paranoid at worst. Regardless, Kleesin travels, alone, mind you, across Dragon Coast while lugging this heavy diving suit. He tries wearing it to see if that's easier, but it's stifling and cumbersome. He tries carrying it over his shoulder, but the weight causes him to swing from side to side. Eventually, he ends up making a makeshift sled for it and drags it behind him. His journal entries become more and more erratic as he travels, his fatigue wearing down on him both physically and psychologically. His thoughts grow wild with the possibilities of what's happened to his friend. Worst of all, he's still not sleeping. Not really, despite his exhaustion. The best he gets is restless fever dreams that last for a few hours at a time. His days and nights begin to blur together, and he experiences surreal visions of life and death and a great white serpent rising from the sea. It's impossible to tell at this point whether his journal entries are real or fantasies, but they are disturbing and haunted nonetheless. Among other things, he talks about the feeling of being followed and watched by a man with a large pack. Eventually, and with substantial difficulty, he miraculously makes it to Serpenthead unscathed. And I really do mean miraculously. Kleesin arrives at his destination with no water remaining, basically no camp supplies, and only a scrap of rations to his name. Now, I've never been to Serpenthead Lake myself, but my friend Osia has, and this is how she described it. It was a lake. I mean, it was more than a lake, but it was a lake. The strange thing about it was that, I don't know, the shape of it almost felt too round. That sounds weird to say out loud, but that's how it felt at the time. Oh, and there's no shore. That's weird too. It's got like weird ridges, and it's weirdly round, and there's no shore. And the water is super dark. Like really dark. But yeah, it's a lake. Riveting. Thank you, Osia. Kleesin doesn't comment on the weird ridges, but he does mention the strange curvature of the lake feeling almost artificial. And of course, he notes the abyssal black color of the water, describing it as darker than the night sky. He peers over the edge where the verdant grassland is suddenly replaced by black water, and the first thing he notices is that there's no reflection on the water's surface. He can't see the sun, or the clouds, or the sky in the reflection. He can't even see himself. The mere appearance of the endless black water gives him chills, and without a reflection on the surface, it feels like gazing over the lip of a cliff into a dark abyss. Paranoid, he carefully gets down on his hands and knees, reaching just his fingertips toward the surface of the water. The moment his fingers disrupt the surface of the lake, he sees an image in his mind of a pale hand reaching out, grasping his wrist, and he pulls away quickly. But there's nothing there. He looks at his fingers, the droplets of liquid clinging to the surface. He expects it to be black and thick like tar, but as he looks at it on his skin, the water is crystal clear. It's just normal water. Still, shaken by his vision, he temporarily retreats from the water's edge. At this time, Kleesin has a rare moment of clarity that he describes as, quote, The clouds and fog that had settled into the crevices of my mind finally parted, revealing the bright blue sky beyond. He realizes that he has a final chance, to turn back and go home. By his own estimations, the potential outcomes from diving into the water are drastically stacked against him. Either 1. He finds Ushu and they both return safely. 2. He finds Ushu and they both perish together. 3. He fails to find Ushu and returns home empty-handed. Or 4. He fails to find Ushu and perishes alone. The way Kleesin describes his deliberation, this point sounds almost pleading. He wants to go home, to leave this strange diving suit behind and simply move on with his life. But he also knows in his heart at this point that it's an impossibility. If he leaves now, he knows the decision will haunt him forever. He will continue to see the diving suit in his dreams, he will continue to have nightmares about Ushu, and he will never forgive himself for walking away. He'll never know if Ushu was waiting for him, or worse, if Nushu needed his help. The choice, he believes, is no more than an illusion. And so, with redoubled determination, he begins to wriggle and writhe his way into the strange diving suit. The thing is complicated and strange, covered in latches and buckles and straps, but eventually he manages to put it on. He takes a few steps, marveling at how well it fits him. The watertight fabric of the diving suit clings to his skin, and he feels like a pea sealed within its pod. It's comforting and stifling and constricting and snug, all at once. Once he's satisfied, he waddles his way back to Serpenthead Lake, and, standing before the water's edge, gazes once more into the abyssal black depths. He picks up the spherical metal helmet, cradling it within his arms. It's heavy, and it reminds him of something between a fishbowl and a prison cell. Certainly not something he should be wearing. Despite that, he carefully slides the helmet onto his head, rotating it so he can see through the circular glass viewport. However, the moment the helmet aligns, he hears a hiss, and the helmet latches into place, sealing him fully within. The sound from the outside world vanishes without a trace, and all he can hear is the sound of his own breathing. The silence quickly becomes overwhelming, deafening, and he becomes aware of the sound of his heart pounding in his ears. Every beat of it feels like a tremor rippling through his body, and he can almost feel the blood pulsing through his veins. The sensation makes his skin crawl, and, quarantined from the outside world, with only a small glass viewport to see out from, he begins to feel deeply claustrophobic. His breathing becomes erratic, and he feels like he's not getting enough air. He grasps at the metal helmet, trying to pry it off his head, but his hands are stuck inside the gloves of the diving suit, and he can't get a proper grip on the metal and glass. He doubles over, his breathing shallow and rapid as he pats around blindly, desperately searching for a latch or anything to release the helmet from his head. He can feel his fingertips growing numb, his vision darkening as his lungs struggle more and more to supply oxygen to his body. He's convinced that he's sealed himself within his own tomb and pulls at the helmet with all his might. A moment later, an impact rolls through his body, and suddenly, it's pitch black. He's fallen in. Even through the fabric of the diving suit, he can feel the chill of the cold lake water bite at his muscles as he tumbles helplessly, his limbs flailing, trying to reorient himself, but he can barely see anything through the glass viewport of the helmet. The suit is cumbersome, and the water feels like black tar. He knows he's descending rapidly, though he doesn't know how rapidly. He doesn't know if he's by the surface or if he's already plummeted far below the depths. This thought spikes his adrenaline, and his rapid breathing begins to fog up the already limited glass viewport. Desperate, he tries weaving, and scarlet strands of essence flare by his visor like ribbons of blood. However, his weaving is uncontrolled and aimless, and the scarlet essence is sparse, quickly depleting, leaving only fading wisps of light in its wake. He squints through the foggy viewport, his eyes clinging to the last bits of light, but all he sees is bubbles rushing by. Kleesin realizes suddenly that he can use the bubbles to figure out which direction is up, and twists his body, finally managing to orient himself toward the surface. At last, he sees the shimmering light of the sun and sky in the distance, high above him. The problem is that he's still sinking into the water, and fast. Using another wisp of scarlet essence, he weaves enough light that he can briefly see what direction the closest wall is, and he drifts toward it, arms outreached. The moment his fingertips make contact, he begins slapping his hands around frantically, trying to find something to grasp, but Serpenthead Lake is shaped like a massive well, and he can't manage to get a proper hold on the smooth, vertical wall. His efforts push him further and further away from the surface, and he can feel cold sweat running down his back as he swims back toward it, running his fingers up and down and across, looking for anything to hold on to. Then a revelation occurs to him. He's in a diving suit, a device made by Ushu specifically for diving. Ushu had been obsessive, but he wasn't stupid. If he had made a suit to descend into the depths of the lake, it must also have a way to ascend. Padding along the outside of the suit, Kleesin stumbles upon a knob by his chest. He tries turning it one way, but nothing happens. Then, as he begins to turn it the other way, he notices his descent gradually begin to slow. He continues to twist it, one turn at a time, until eventually he's perfectly buoyant. He describes the feeling as being the yolk of an egg. Finally, having a moment of calm, Kleesin allows himself to float in the dark water and catch his breath, his heartbeat drumming in his ears. His mouth is dry, which feels ironic, considering he's submerged head to toe in water, and he feels his limbs trembling with a frantic jitter. Still, he's stable for now. Kleesin closes his eyes and tries to clear his thoughts, to shake off the fear that's soaked deep into his bones. As he does so, he gradually becomes aware of the numb soreness in his muscles. He becomes aware of the sweat that's drenched through his clothes. He becomes aware of the bile stirring at the back of his throat. He becomes aware of an itch deep within his skin that feels like maggots crawling within him. He tries once more to push away the feelings, but they slither back like the inevitable tide, and he can't shake an unease deep within his heart. He can't shake the thought that there is something off about the water, something he can't quite place his finger on. To distract himself, Kleesin turns to face the sky once more. Against the alien feeling of the water, the strange, shimmering disk of the distant sky feels comforting. It feels like the light before death. He reaches to his chest to turn the dial again, and to his great relief, he begins to ascend back toward the surface. The disk of light grows brighter and brighter, warmer and warmer, and he feels desperate to rip the helmet from his head and breathe fresh air once more. But just as he's about to reach the surface, Kleesin suddenly turns the dial the other way, and again he's become yolk. The surface is just out of arm's reach. He can almost feel the kiss of sunlight on his bare skin, the caress of the ocean breeze rippling along the hairs of his arms, the fragrant whisper of sea salt and drake lilies filling his nostrils. But he knows that if he emerges from the water and crawls out of the lake, he won't be able to go back in. Once he feels the warm salvation of the sun, no amount of willpower will convince him to plunge himself once more into the dark, haunted waters of Serpenthead Lake. In a moment of what can only be described as madness, he decides he must continue on. He doesn't know where he's going, but he knows in his heart that Ushu is here, somewhere. He needs to go further. He needs to go deeper. He can almost feel Ushu calling out to him. And so, with the reassurance that he can at least briefly generate light with weaving, and that he can ascend and descend using the suit, he twists the dial once more, the other way this time, and begins to sink back into the depths. He braces his legs and kicks off the wall, using his limbs to slowly propel him toward the middle of the lake, paddling into the unknown as the darkness around him grows deeper and colder. In his words, he says, "I have never known that there is something darker than black, emptier than black, more absolute than black, until I witnessed the depths of Serpenthead Lake." It is with this observation that something occurs to him, and he understands at last the inescapable, creeping, haunting sensation that's been biting at him. There is no life in Serpenthead Lake. No fish, no algae, not even moss on the walls. Aside from Kleesin, the well of Serpenthead Lake is completely devoid of any movement or life. 1,000 thoughts swarm through his mind like a cloud of gnats, and he pushes through them, trying not to dwell on his revelation or its implications. All he can do is keep moving forward, paddling slowly, diving into oblivion. As he continues to dive deeper and deeper, Kleesin's breathing grows steady and still, and aside from the slush of water and the gentle rhythm of his heart, it's all he can hear. He describes the feeling as almost meditative, as if he's falling into a trance. The water feels warm, like it's perfectly matched to his body. He melts into it. He no longer feels his limbs or his muscles or even his skin. His body feels amorphous, like jelly, like the bones within his body have slid out into the darkness, never to be seen again. He describes it as drifting through a dream, a wonderful, calm dream, where he's the only thing that exists in the entire world. There is no pain, no fear, no sensation in his dream, and no Ushu. Reflecting back on it, Kleesin wonders if that moment was the first moment of true peace he's ever experienced. He wonders if it's the only moment of true peace he'll ever experience. The sensation of losing himself, he says, is bliss. And so he succumbs to the dream, and his mind evaporates into the ether. Then, suddenly, his dream is shattered. A dark, alien sound tears through the meditative veil that's overcome him and rips him from the comforting embrace of his trance-like state. Suddenly, Kleesin finds himself alert, aware of the raw sensation of his own mortality. In the abyssal depths of Serpenthead Lake, far beyond the reach of the sun, Kleesin discovers that he is not alone. Now lucid, he feels pinpricks along his skin, but they're more like mosquitoes or ants biting into him. He has a sudden urge to rip his suit off, even though he knows it will kill him. And then he feels something. In his journal, Kleesin has difficulty describing the feeling, but he says it's like a slow rolling sensation across his body, pushing and pulling him. It takes him a while to realize, firstly, that it was a wave, and secondly, that whatever thing created the wave must be tremendously large. Hands shaking, Kleesin frantically pats around the outside of his suit until he finds the dial. He desperately tries to remember which direction he had turned it earlier, but with his heart drumming in his ears, his whole body trembling, his mind swimming, it's no use. In a panic, he twists it, and immediately he feels his body begin to move. He tries to look around, but there's no light at all. He can't even tell if his eyes are open or closed. The feeling makes him sick, and chills ripple down his spine like waves crashing into the shore. He wants to use his essence to create light, but he's terrified that it will alert whatever is down here to his presence, if it hasn't noticed him already. But the feeling of not knowing, of not being able to perceive anything around himself, is the truest horror he's ever felt. The creature could be a distance away, eyeing him, or it could be right beside him, just beyond the tips of his fingers. The thought becomes too much to bear, and he grows lightheaded, his stomach churning, his consciousness rapidly fading. Before he fully loses consciousness, however, something strikes his helmet, and it forces him awake once more. It feels like a heavy rock or a tree stump. His body grows stiff, his mind spiraling as he tries to figure out what it could have possibly been. Then it hits again. Something strikes his helmet, but this time it turns, laying on his body. He pushes away from it, terrified to touch it, but a moment later it comes back, striking him, then laying against him once more. Cautiously, he places his hand on it and realizes that the surface is hard. He runs his hand along the smooth surface, and a chilling revelation spreads through his body like lightning. He's gone the wrong way. In his panic, he had turned the dial the wrong direction, and instead of ascending, he had descended, all the way to the bottom of Serpenthead Lake. He hears a strange sound, an almost mouse-like squeak that causes his entire body to clench. A deep trembling resonates from within his bones as he tries to search for the valve, only to find that his body can barely move. It's now that he notices that he's freezing cold, and that his limbs feel brittle when he tries moving them, like they might snap off if he pushes them too hard. The squeaking continues, and he pats around the outside of his suit with mounting hysteria, his breathing short and shallow, and he can feel waves of sheer terror rippling through him as he tries to feel where the valve is. His thoughts spiral as his body is pressed against the frigid floor of the lake bed, and he wills himself to move, tears rushing to his eyes as pain pulses through his body. At last, he manages to grasp the valve and twists it the other direction, his fingers burning as the metal presses through the gloves against his frozen skin. He hears squeaking once more, and finally recognizes it as the sound of his own voice, whimpering. The diving suit begins to move, his body twisting, rolling through the darkness like a shooting star tumbling through the night sky. While this is all happening, for a moment, just the briefest moment, he thinks he spots a pair of eyes, gazing at him through the darkness. But it quickly vanishes as he's dragged through the water. Kleesin looks around desperately into the pitch-black abyss, searching for the light of the sky as he tumbles helplessly. He doesn't know how long he's been down here, and he doesn't know how deep he is, but he knows that as long as he continues to ascend, he'll see the sun once more. He knows that. Right up until the moment that his body crashes against a hard surface. Waves of pain rack through his body as he slams his head, sending him into a daze. He bounces off the surface before crashing into it again, moments later. And then his body grows still, and his mind grinds to a halt. He knows he's alive, but beyond that, he knows nothing. Slowly, dreadfully, he reaches out and pats the surface. It's hard, but how can that be? He descended the first time and hit the floor of Serpenthead Lake, so when he turned the knob the second time, he should have ascended to the surface. But again, his body is pressed up against the surface, unable to move. He tries to imagine the scenario in his head, but no matter how many times he considers it, it simply doesn't make sense. How could he have moved one way, then the other, and hit a hard surface on both sides? Unless, somehow in the time that he had been diving, he had moved further, out of the well of Serpenthead Lake, into an underwater tunnel. Chills ripple across his skin. Kleesin spins around, disoriented, fully lost. There's no way for him to know which direction he came from, where the entrance to the tunnel is. If he had truly navigated into an underwater tunnel, then... He shakes the thought from his mind and begins frantically patting and then striking the floor or ceiling or whatever he had crashed into, desperate to find a hole, to carve a way back to the surface. His nerves scream as waves of searing pain wash through his hands and arms, and he fears for a moment that his bones will crumble and his diving suit will tear, but the fear of being trapped in an underwater tomb sends his body into overdrive, and so he continues to slam his fists with wild abandon. Until finally, something budges. Something gives. The surface shifts, and a piece of it breaks off. He grasps it in his hands, his fingers running along its perimeter, and even through his gloves, even though he's never touched anything like it before, he knows what they are. Bones. He continues to pat around furiously and finds more and more fragments, some straight, some curved, some big, some small. He can't see them and has no way to identify them, but something inside his gut tells him these are all human bones. His skin begins to crawl as he once again grows still. Kleesin is in a terribly desperate state. He doesn't know where he is. He doesn't know how he got here. All he knows is that somehow he's found himself in an abyssal tomb, a graveyard of bones, deep within Serpenthead Lake. He begins to furiously pat against the pile of bones that he crashed into, running his hands along the bumpy surface, desperate to find any kind of opening. He pulls bone after bone, tossing them aside as he digs, but he makes futile progress. And then, like the call of death, he hears it again. Klee turns toward the darkness, his heart pounding in his ears. He feels a tingling sensation, like 1,000 spiders crawling over the surface of his body, and he realizes that the water has grown warm. Uncomfortably warm. He reaches for his chest, for the depth control knob, and this time he finds it with ease. However, when he twists it, nothing happens. He swallows, turning it the other direction, but again, nothing happens. The water continues to grow warmer, and then, from the darkness, something begins to emerge. 2 luminescent orbs. Eyes. It feels like his spine is trying to crawl out of his body as he twists and turns the dial frantically, back and forth, desperate to go somewhere, anywhere. He can feel his will to survive burning like a fierce pyre until at last, the dial snaps off. His fingers grow limp, the cool metal dial drifting from his hand out toward the abyss, toward the glowing eyes. And just like that, the remainder of his willpower is extinguished, not even leaving a wisp of smoke in its wake as the eyes grow closer and closer, nearer and nearer. At this point, Kleesin is fully motionless save for his throbbing heart, and it feels like his soul is being wrenched from his body. His muscles dissolve into the water, his lungs melt into his chest, and his heart finally crawls to a stop. He experiences true silence as his entire body submits to its inevitable fate. He is a prisoner in his own body, forced to witness his own end as only a spectator. And in his last moments, with nothing left to do, he offers a prayer. He prays to no divine in particular, but to the heart of Isarine herself. "Please," he whispers, "just let me see Ushu one last time before I go." Suddenly, out of the darkness, a pair of hands grasp him. Long, bony fingers press into his arms, causing his eyes to shoot open, and he finds himself staring into what appears to be a reflection. Illuminated by an alien, crimson light, he sees the strange circular viewport of the diving helmet reflected back at him, and he sees a crack across it, like lightning forking across the night sky. And then, just beyond the surface of the cracked glass, a pair of eyes blink open. It's not a reflection. The sight is too much for him to bear, and he screams, thrashing his body, desperate to break free, but the creature's grasp is too strong. It drags him deeper into the watery grave, through the bones, as he screams and screams until his throat is raw and he can scream no more. All the while, the face grows closer and closer, the eyes glowing brighter and brighter. He shuts his eyes, too terrified to look at it. But he can't escape its gaze. Even through his eyelids, he can see the harsh light from the creature's eyes piercing through, staring at him, into him, until long last. Klee's body spasms with a start, and he finds himself staring into the blazing sun overhead. He reaches for his head, but his fingers slide along the metal and glass of the helmet, so he rips the gloves off from his hand. With a frantic energy, he twists and pushes and pulls at the helmet until finally it hisses, releasing him. He tosses it aside, collapsing to his hands and knees, gasping for air. Once he's caught his breath, he proceeds to rip the rest of the diving suit off his body and crawls away from it. Somehow, he's ended up outside of Serpenthead Lake. And somehow, he's alive. He's drenched in sweat and vomit, his throat is on fire, and his entire body aches with an unfathomable pain. But he's alive. All right, divers, let's all take a collective breath because I got chills from that haunting encounter. All of this was written in his journal, which he provided in his letter to me. Most of it was written in a panicked daze, presumably once he woke up outside Serpenthead Lake. No further information was provided by Kleesin, and when I reached out via the Hunters Guild, I was told that his residence has been abandoned for several months now. Following Kleesin's disappearance, several hunters were dispatched to look for him at Serpenthead Lake, but there was no evidence of where he'd gone. All they found was the abandoned diving suit with the glass of the helmet cracked. Now, if you're anything like me, this whole story left you with a whole lot more questions than answers, so I reached out to my good friend Acir to see if he had any thoughts.
Dear Pahli, always a pleasure to hear from you. This story, while frightening at first glance, has two relatively innocent explanations. The first, and least interesting, is the nature of his fall at the beginning of the story, where he plunges into Serpenthead Lake. Based on the description of the diving helmet being constructed of metal and glass, it's very possible that Kleesin simply tripped away from the water's edge and slammed his head into the helmet, rendering him unconscious. He woke up concussed after a terrifying dream of an otherworldly dive, but was never in any real danger to begin with. However, this solution ignores some critical evidence. Firstly, based on the samples retrieved from Serpenthead Lake, traces of lake water were discovered on and inside the suit. While it's possible that something could have splashed lake water onto the suit, it was found quite a distance away from the lake itself, and based on Kleesin's description of what happened after he woke up, it seems unlikely that he would have gotten lake water splashed on the inside of the suit. Secondly, analysis of the materials shows superficial but significant plastic deformation of many of the alloys in the diving suit, consistent with what I believe to be a high-pressure environment. Many aspects of the suit were designed to withstand high pressure, but due to shoddy construction and improper use, several components were at a point of critical or complete failure, including the buoyancy control valve that he mentions breaking. Thirdly, regarding his own report of the events that occurred, it seemed that Kleesin had no prior knowledge or understanding of the diving suit before the events at Serpenthead Lake, and is indeed caught by surprise both when the helmet airlocks into the suit, as well as when he discovers the buoyancy control valve for the first time. Regarding the latter device, the function of the buoyancy control valve would not and could not have become apparent to him unless explicitly explained to him, or, more likely, if he had practical experience with it. It is simply not something one would intuit through a dream. Finally, the damage on the suit, from the buoyancy control valve to scratches and cracks, are consistent with his account of what happened. Most peculiar of these, of course, is a series of 16 finger marks imprinted upon the arms of the suit. These impressions were created with such force that they nearly tore through the fabric of the suit, and likely would have left severe bruising on the skin. None of these signs of damage were accounted for when Pahli first retrieved the suit from Ushu's house in Jhante. Based on the aforementioned pieces of evidence, I believe that it's most probable that Kleesin did indeed fall into Serpenthead Lake. I believe that his account of the events is accurate until the point in which he discovers the buoyancy control valve, and subsequently decides to dive into the lake to find Ushu. Diving as a concept may be somewhat foreign to most of Isarine, but in my home of entropy, diving is a practice critical to retrieving rare materials and minerals only found deep within the sea of entropy. It's because of this that technologies like the entropic diving suit were invented to begin with. However, there are many issues that simple inventions have not been able to overcome. Many of these problems arise from the fact that water pressure increases dramatically as one dives deeper beneath the surface. One such problem is a condition known as nitrogen narcosis. You see, at depth, pressure affects gases in the air, resulting in an increased absorption of nitrogen and other gases into the blood, resulting in a psychologically altered state similar to intoxication. The results of nitrogen narcosis involve perceptual hallucinations, loss of sensation, a sense of relief or tranquility, and the impairment of motor and cognitive function. Now, if we review the account of Kleesin through the lens of nitrogen narcosis, the vast majority of his experience can be accounted for. My belief is that as he began to dive, the effects of nitrogen narcosis overwhelmed him, and he entered a fugue-like state, losing sense of what was going on and hallucinating his experiences, until at last he managed to switch the buoyancy control valve to the right direction and descended back to the surface. Additionally, the pain he describes is easily explained by a condition known as decompression sickness, wherein surfacing too quickly from a dive can cause severe muscular pain and nausea, consistent with the full body pain he experiences after waking up and the fact that he's covered in vomit. I hope this helps. Sincerely yours, Acir Solavat.
Thank you, Acir. Well, there you have it. A perfectly palatable, though no less dangerous, explanation of what happened to Kleesin of Jhante in the depths of Serpenthead Lake. Now, even if there isn't a horrifying creature awaiting you beneath the water's surface, I must remind you all to please not attempt anything like this. If someone you know and love goes missing, please report it to the Hunters Guild. If they're unable to find them, then believe you me, you won't fare any better. Please do not take matters into your own hands. As much as I love making Dark Depths episodes for you all, I would prefer that my precious divers aren't the ones at the heart of the stories. Kleesin is incredibly lucky to have escaped the encounter with only nightmares, and I'm sure he knows that as well. His story is a warning tale for all who might be tempted to follow in his footsteps, and I hope you all heed it well. Leave the adventuring and investigations to trained hunters. In any case, thank you for joining me on another thrilling and harrowing adventure into the dark depths of Isarine. Remember to stay safe out there, and please refrain from jumping into any bottomless lakes. As for what happened to his friend Ushu, well, that's a story for another day. Thank you so much to everyone who gave this first episode of Dark Depths podcast a chance, and we sincerely hope you enjoyed listening. Dark Depths is a podcast brought to you by Sophie T of Sophie Industries and Shelby Ann of Stellar Phoenix, LLC. Originally a piece of lore within the fictional world of Isarine, we thought everyone deserved to hear the mysterious tales Pahli has to tell. Who doesn't love listening to the scary misfortunes of others? I'm looking at you, crime and thriller enthusiasts. So we started a podcast. To help support this passion project and get nifty rewards every month, head over to our Patreon at patreon.com/thedarkdepths. You can also become a member for free. Starting at our snorkeler tier, get behind the scenes content that shows the making of our episodes and Patreon rewards, and engage with us in question and answer segments. At our diver tier, get early access to each weekly episode, watch blooper content, and receive physical rewards such as a postcard and bookmark featuring an episode from that month. A discount code for Isarine merch purchased from Stellar Phoenix LLC is also included. The Deep Diver tier offers the most benefits, adding a sticker featuring Isarine art and an original collectible character card to your physical rewards, and your name will be mentioned in the thank you credits of every episode. If you would like to contact us for any reason, questions, comments, admissions of love and adoration, please do so via our Patreon. If you enjoyed any part of this episode, whether the story we had to tell or the incredible voice acting bringing it to life, please share it with a friend or a complete stranger. Sharing is caring. Our episodes are uploaded every Thursday to Patreon, Spotify, YouTube, and Apple. Follow along as we continue to investigate and update you about the latest terrifying news. We can be found on Instagram at Dark Depths Podcast. Thanks for joining. See you next week on the Dark Depths Podcast.
Dear Pahli, as requested, I've split my thoughts into 2 letters. for the simplicity of your Dark Depths publication. While the explanation that I offered in the previous letter is certainly a possibility, it leaves two unresolved anomalies. The first is the 16 finger marks previously mentioned. Though this damage may have been a combined result of the extreme pressure at depth, along with the quirk of the manufacturing process of this particular diving suit. However, without further information, it's impossible to speculate. The second anomaly is that the entire interior of the diving suit was covered in two liquids. One of the liquid samples matches the lake water. The other matches the clear fluid sample found in Ushu's residence. This, again, is well beyond my ability to speculate upon. I will take it upon myself to reach out to the Dragon Coast Hunters Guild for more information regarding the clear fluid sample, as well as a sample of the suit fabric. I will let you know what I find. One more thing. When reviewing Kleesin's account of the events at Serpenthead Lake, his description of the lifeless water, in conjunction with a graveyard of bones, seems to indicate the presence of a dead zone. I don't think we should read too much into it, since we don't know how reliable his account of the events actually was. But regardless, if his account is to be believed, then the creature he describes is almost certainly a transcendent. One that has been feeding off the blood of Sola Sasana Jivan for centuries. My recommendation, to be safe, is to fully seal off Serpenthead Lake. Whatever is down there must never rise to the surface. Sincerely yours, Acir Solavat.
You're done?
Yep, read the whole thing.
So, what do you think?
Well, you included more than I expected.
But
You didn't really explain why Ushu started on the obsession to begin with. Pahli,
it's not relevant to the story.
it's... Fine. Well, I followed up on the handwriting analysis.
And,
Doesn't match, just like you suspected.
oh,
Yeah, the handwriting analysis shows that the entries prior to Serpenthead Lake do match the portions about the diving, right up until the mention of the glowing eyes growing closer. Everything after that is, well...
okay. Thank you. Well, we should proceed with quarantining Serpenthead Lake. Did you have a chance to talk to Ariana?
Oh, right, yeah. She said that the Legend of Serpenthead has remained fairly consistent, but has mostly faded from existence. The fact that it came to both of your attentions made her kind of suspicious, so she did some digging, and she discovered that recent mentions of Serpenthead Lake have suddenly spiked in the last few years.
Why?
That's the thing. She has no idea. She tried to trace back where people heard it from, but it's all like disparate people from all around Alexandria. I looked into it and I didn't find...
What? You look like you're thinking about something.
Well, I did notice that they had one commonality. It's just...
What is it?
They're all Obsidian Bloom members.
Huh? That's impossible. Are you sure?
Yeah, that's literally the only thing that connects them.
Did you tell Ariana?
No, not yet.
Okay, can you keep this between us?
Then, can I ask you something?
Is it about Starfall?
No.
Okay, sure.
Why didn't you tell Acir about the body we found at Serpenthead Lake? The body in the diving suit. You know, the one that matches Kleesin's description?
Close the door.